All right, guys, welcome, welcome, welcome. We are going to kick this off here. Let me give you a couple of directions of what we're doing here first. So this week, I'm going to try to, those of you that are in class, out of class, this is one of the reasons I'm doing this as we get closer to crunch time of the AP test. I'm going to post a video for each lesson with some questions to go with it. Those of you that are in class, this should take about half of class, and then we'll follow up with a little Q&A to get so reaffirm some of the ideas and concepts, make sure we're all on the same page. And those of you that aren't here, which seems to be increasing due to a lot of valid reasons, okay, that I want to kind of take care of that too, so that we can make sure that everything's covered and then have that full last week to be able to review leading up to that. Okay, so that's where we're at here. So in terms of today's content, all right, so those of you who aren't here, there should be a question sheet on the classroom. Those who are here, you can use that too, obviously. And I probably already gave you the handout that goes with this, with the questions. All right. So 5.9 is a continuation, a little bit of 5.8, which was presidential elections. And we talked about that process. What we include today is there's a lot of similar stuff here. The same four-step process here. Let me move on to that. The same four-step process that we discussed in presidential elections is going to be very similar, okay, during congressional elections. But it's slightly different in regards to some of the processes and the nuances of the process of getting someone nominated and getting them put in. Okay, there's still the exploratory campaigning. There's still intra-party elections through primaries and caucuses. That still happens at the congressional level, and it happens at the state level. So you're bound. We'll talk about that here in a second. And then candidate nomination via party convention. We don't see a necessarily convention style and how this works. And then you're going to have the general election and midterm elections. We're going to remove the electoral college for this piece, right? So there's no electoral college piece to congressional elections. So let's take a look at this here. All right, let me minimize. Let me give myself the mouse. Okay. And what we want to look at here is, once again, incumbency and how that plays a role with Congress. There's an incumbency advantage again, and we're going to look at some charts here in a little bit that show this. All right, why? Name recognition, which we discussed with the presidency. They have a record. They have whatever they've done. Obviously, hopefully positive that they can run on, and how they can twist. I don't need to re-explain what we did for presidential, because it's very similar in that regard. What some differences here, though, too. The franking privilege. What is that? Franking privilege is where they can use essentially postal services for free. They can't use it for what is considered like direct campaigning, but they can send you something out in regards to their voting record, which is their on job. It's not quote unquote campaigning, but this is a way for them to get in front of the voter. And we know what it is. I mean, we know that it is campaigning, but they're doing it indirectly in that form. And like I said, they have franking privilege as an incumbent or as somebody that's sitting in Congress at that point in time. But there's a lot of time spent on fundraising, and you read the quote down there where congressmen spend between 5 and 7 hours a day on the phone begging for money. So, and the process really starts once they get elected. Like, it's a constant reelection process. We'll talk about this with the modern campaign in the next lesson. But when once they get elected, this process starts, and they're trying to work at the same time. All right, so you can see just the idea of the balance of what some of the things that they're doing. We know that they love, some congressmen and women love to put themselves in front of the camera at certain times. A lot of that is those soundbite moments, which is, it's kind of a form of campaigning to be heard, whether it be by their district or just kind of who knows what they're hoping for their future. You never know. So let's talk about the middle part there, state election impacts. So obviously, you're going to have some national and federal laws, which are still somewhat of a role here, but a little bit different, because you're really hamstrung to what happens at the state election. So there's still going to be those caucuses, primaries, conventions. They're still going to canvass the vote. Is this a good candidate? Depending on whether obviously they're incumbent or not, or new to challenge the incumbent. The same thing with the open and closed primaries, and just really getting on the ballot. All right. Um, And then you go through what is that general election. Um, and then we have midterm elections too when we're talking about Congress. We know how Senate, right, 6 year, 2 year terms for the House. So depending on that election cycle, you might be at the midterm. Which what is that going to play a role in terms of turnout? We know midterm elections not going to have a higher turnout, as high of a turnout as a presidential election year. So depending on what's going on there, could play a role in the likelihood of someone being challenged during that election, and obviously maybe the seat changing with what's going on there. And then the role of linkage institutions, they play a role here with congressional elections, endorsements, and endorsements can come. Sometimes you'll see where in the primary process, right, you'll have an endorsement maybe by the president to one candidate over another from a party, or even just endorsing a candidate. Or sometimes, if it's that midterm, maybe they will speak at one of their um, like a rally, whatever you want to call those different things that individuals are having. But that can be done too as an endorsement. Obviously, the mobilization, obviously at a state level, this can also happen when you talk about in like mobilization and financing. When there's a candidate, when you get these contested seats where it's going to be close, where you get that +5 Republican Democrat, like where there's a margin there that they can work with polling, where they could possibly overturn the seat, or it's going to be highly contested. That's when you'll see maybe federal money from parties like being pumped into that candidate. Um, there's media coverage for specific. Sometimes there's some media darlings, what we would call them, in the House and Senate, which have their voice heard. But then there's also just those contested seats that we know. When you think about even like right now, like what's happening, like the Senate could be overturned, the House, like what could be the change there? Because we know having the majority for that party is really important in the functioning of our government. So those is where you'll see the media and the financing from parties and other outside sources really going into some of those contested uh, races. So, um, all right. So we want to step back, and I want to show you this chart here to talk about incumbency advantage. All right. When you look at this, that red line, blue line, those are kind of just like those averages. This is an old graph from an old AP exam. Those of you reading the source, all right, comes right out of the classroom. So when we look at examining the trends for incumbents, all right, what is that average trend? That's that red and blue line, right? So you have, at the end of the day, you have a gradual increase, okay, for all as time has gone on, the likelihood of an incumbent being reelected, okay, has only increased over time. Now we've had some dips, and we'll talk about those here in a second, all right? So at the end of the day, this shows us that incumbents are more likely to get reelected, all right? Um, and you see the difference in between the House and the Senate. All right, now it's relatively close. You saw changes where you have moments where the Senate was higher, moments where the House was higher. So it differs, but you can still see that gradual increase. You do see some deviations, okay, from the trends where you see it was about 74. All right, where you got here in 1974. Those of you that are wondering what's going on there, what's happening in that election, that's post Watergate. All right. And then you see, well, what happens then in 1980? Okay. This is why. So you got the incumbency drop, and then you got the big increase all the way up to really 84. Okay. And then back down a little bit in 88. But this is what we'd call that red wave election is what happened in this one, right? So the red wave, you're going to have a lot of Republicans lose their seat and then increase their seats. Okay, you get into 1980, you're going to get that flow of. So this is the end of Carter, the beginning of Reagan, where you're going to see that increase and you're going to see a change and a flip. Okay, and what happens there in the Senate, and what is the reasoning? A lot of that can be, you can base that off of what previously happened, right? So Carter and then Reagan coming in and what happens there. And a lot of times right after an election, you might see a change flip the other way at that midterm. You'll see that midterm, which is kind of a referendum on the presidency when you're talking about the House and the Senate. All right. So, what contributes to these trends? All right. So, first off, campaign finance playing a role here. You're going to have transparency requirements are a little bit are minimal, a little bit some changes in the House and Senate, and you have some state laws that you're going to abide by a little bit. All right, and they're very diverse at the state level. Okay, whether it be election laws, financing laws. There's obviously some federal ones that have to be abided by too. Um, but a lot of these federal cases, which we'll talk about here in a couple lessons moving forward, are going to influence the amount of money in politics. All right, but it is this idea of kind of transparency of who are your donors, how much they gave, how much can they give. That plays a big role in how that differs a little bit state to state. But like I said, some federal laws there in regards to campaign finance, but can play a large role in where the money goes. And I revisit a slide a couple times ago, a few back, where obviously the amount of money that's going to certain contested races. Okay, the more contested in kind of a state where it can be flipped, you're going to see a little bit more money put into that by the party at the federal level. Okay, next is the nationalization of congressional races, outside donations to key races. This is what I brought up earlier, and I'm kind of revisiting. It was here. I probably was supposed to wait till here, but I kind of jumped the gun there. So where that comes from, like you could have money pumping in from, like I said, from funneled in out of the state through large donors to the parties, whatever it is, to kind of help individuals. The caps on donations a little bit more eased. All right, the media coverage, how they're going to cover this, you'll see as we get closer to this coming November, they're going to be in the media. They're going to cover those tight races. Okay, and they're going to spend a lot of time on that because they know that government can fundamentally change in regards to, I think I brought this up in class in here. Just think of the idea if the Senate flips, right? If the Senate goes from Democrats having the majority to Republicans, and let's say something happens to a Supreme Court justice, right? What's going to happen there, right? Because we know the Senate's role, okay, in the process of putting a new justice on the bench. So what could happen there? Could they refuse to kind of go through even the nomination process? It could be really interesting. So we know that with how our current setup is in the House and Senate, it plays a large role in how we function as a government. All right. Like I said, the referendum on a president, we saw that with the last chart with kind of the Carter-Reagan switch there of what happens. All right. And then partisanship in elections. Geographic and ideological self-sorting. What is this? What we're starting to see is people are moving, literally physically moving, okay, to those who agree with them. Like people are upseating that. It's not at a rapid rate, but we're seeing a little bit more. And people are now, you have the option to listen to only those who agree with you. So in regards to partisanship and how that plays a role in elections, like I can turn on a news station, and if I want to be reaffirmed how I feel about this Democratic candidate, I can choose a news station that's all they're going to show me, and they're going to tell me how bad the Republican is. Okay, or this vice versa. If I choose that I only want to listen to Republican, and then I can tune out, or they can bash the Democratic candidate, I have that option. Okay, and that's what we're talking about with geographic and ideological self-sorting. Outside group influence, all right, primary and narrow casting. This is interesting in terms of primarying, where this is focused on having individuals lose their primary. And this is the intra-party competition. So within the Republican or Democratic Party, where maybe they don't feel as good about a candidate and they know that maybe they don't even have as good a chance, like this candidate, when we get to the general election, is probably going to struggle. So you see what happens within, or we want to kind of oust this individual out of their seat. Maybe it is somebody that served an incumbent, but that plays a role there. And then obviously, you guys know gerrymandering plays a huge role in when we talk about congressional elections. All right, not Senate so much, but in the House, All right, I've Senate not at all, right? It's 2 seats. We know popular vote for each state, but that the role of that in the House elections cannot be overstated. Okay, plays a large role. I don't have to spend a lot of time on what that is, um, but you guys get it. All right, this is just average years of service. So what are we talking about? This talks a little bit to incumbency. I just want to show you this chart. All right, this is something that has increased. Some of it, obviously, in the beginning, there's only a certain amount of time that you can be in there. But even this trend as we go on, typically, um, the amount of years that someone's going to spend. When you look at this right now, right, the house we're at with 2019, you're close to about 8 to 10 years, and you're little 10 plus there in the Senate from the beginning of their term and how long someone serves. So multiple, right? So multiple terms are being served. Obviously, in the House with the 2 year, you're talking about multiple ones. All right, and then you have some, and it really depends on district, right? Is it more of a purple district where you're going to see the flip back and forth? Is it a how is the state, and that kind of sometimes brings down. We know that there are some that are unmatched. I just look at just think of Marcy Kaptur, right? So which now it looks like she could be in a little bit tighter race with the way that they have this newest map that is drawn. Okay, or we could see some changes, but this is just another one to show kind of the length of term and the average years of prior service, which I find this interesting. So, and you're going to have a question that obviously you have to answer that deals with this. So, all right, we will discuss this in class here shortly. Those of you that aren't here, if you have any questions, come see me, and I can hopefully help you.